to episode 55 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and expressed in this podcast by myself and my interview guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources, so whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast is something for you. Happy New Year! This is our first episode of 2020, and invariably it has come up that this is a great time to create resolutions. And I'll be honest, I fall squarely in the category of people who do not make New Year's resolutions. So I was really glad to see when Linda Sue Park posted on Twitter on New Year's Day, quote, "If the date makes you want to reflect, I wish you well. If not, come sit here next to me and have tea, coffee, a drink, while not making any year or decade-ending lists, because each day, every small step is its own celebration." End quote. I was so glad to know someone else shares my feelings about resolutions. I consider resolutions to be burdensome, and I've discovered over the years that I'll come to resent whatever it is I've agreed to do and then abandon it, ultimately. And what I will say is this. Because you are listening to this podcast, you have already decided to invest in yourself in a way that requires you to reflect frequently and be open to ideas. As lifelong learners, school librarians by nature are constantly questioning and looking to improve, whether it is in our personal or our professional lives. We already set incredibly high expectations of ourselves, and I can say this with certainty thanks to the wonderful school librarians who have joined me on this podcast journey so far. I would like to extend a very special welcome this week to first-year librarian Kelly from Kentucky. I was very glad to hear from you over the break. I also really enjoyed hearing from Sharon McElmeal, who is an associate lecturer for the College of Education, Hospitality, Health and Human Services, Teaching, Learning, and Leadership at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. She teaches electives in the graduate program in the College of Education and the requirements for the reading certificate credentials offered by the state of Wisconsin. And in this case, she is teaching classes in children's literature and young adult literature. I, for one, have vivid memories of taking both YA Lit and children's literature at the Wayne State University when I was taking my library school courses. And it was interestingly the two classes which oftentimes, because they were cross-listed with the School of Education, was one of the few times where people who were training to be teachers and people who were training to be librarians were in the same room. And I think that that's important because we have a lot to learn from one another. And I do want to continue with what Sharon shared with me. She has always used newsletters to reach out to her students, and she included me on this because she mentioned one of our episodes, and she said to her students in a newsletter, "I'd like to introduce you to a podcast regarding the use of Wikipedia. Amy Herman expresses her opinion, parentheses, one I share," and this is Sharon talking to her students, "regarding the use of Wikipedia, parentheses, students or teachers for research, and parentheses." And then Sharon goes on to explain, "I generally tell my students that Wikipedia is like asking your favorite uncle for information on any topic. It's a place that might give you ideas, but unless he is recognized expert in that topic, it's just his opinion. Perhaps a correct opinion, but perhaps not. but it might provide a place to start with vocabulary or ideas to actually then research. But otherwise, I want to know the information has been vetted by those who have spent time with research and verification, end quote. And it was interesting because the more Sharon and I exchanged emails, the more we realized that librarians have encountered something else that Sharon has found in her practice, and that is the labeling of books by reading level. And she made a really interesting point that she feels that labeling books with a reading level is a clear violation of FERPA law and is certainly not in the best interest of readers. And I think a lot of librarians can get behind that idea. I also took the opportunity to share with Sharon the link to an episode done during season 1 called Leveled Books, A Necessary Evil. And if you haven't taken a listen to the Wikipedia episode, it still remains one of the more contentious issues that I address, and one which I was pretty sure I was going to lose some listeners. And Leveled Books is one which I'm looking forward to revisiting because I think it's a conversation which needs to continue because it persists in all of our schools and impacts how people come and expect to be able to find books in our library. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. And I've already said this before, but this is how this podcast grows, and it's rather organic because podcast listeners will reach out and say, hey, you haven't done this episode, and I think it's a great topic, and I'm going to then turn around and say, I'd love to hear what experts have to say, and people say, I'm not an expert. But you know what? If you are doing these things in your library, that gives you far more perspective and experience than many of us. And so I encourage you, if you have something which you think should be shared with this platform, I open my earphones and will share this platform with anybody who has ideas that they feel we all can benefit from. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be happy to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, a balancing act, work and school. It isn't uncommon for educators to take classes while working full-time. In fact, for many of us, it's a requirement to renew our teaching certificate. While our state mandates are no doubt varied, it makes sense to get a master's degree early in our careers, as it not only enables us to renew a certificate we have to, but it also allows us to move up in the pay scale in most cases. I'm convinced there is no stress-free way to pursue a degree or an additional certification, whether you're working part-time or full-time or not at all. Today, I am talking with Patrick Taylor, a school librarian who is currently working full-time and getting his master's in library science. For some, this will be a walk down memory lane. For others, just nod your head and say, been there, done that. And I know there are many listeners who are currently in library school. And when you're working, that is truly a balancing act. And now, my interview with Patrick Taylor. Hey friends, today I am very excited to be sharing a conversation with Patrick Taylor. And Patrick Taylor is a full-time school librarian and also going to library school. And I really wanted to focus today on how he balances the demands of both. So Patrick Taylor, let us hear a little bit about you. Can you tell us about yourself, about your current library?
Yeah, so I am currently the sole librarian for East Point Public Schools. So I'm responsible for 6 different buildings that I oversee. Yeah, it's a lot. So what I do, my time is split in kind of a weird way. So I'm at one elementary school, and it's a K2 building, and I teach there every morning, K2 classes, library classes. And then in the afternoons, I travel to the different buildings in the district. So on Monday, I go to the middle school. On Tuesday, I go to one of the 3-5 buildings. On Wednesday, I go to the other K2 building. Thursday, I go to the other 3-5 building. And Friday, I go to the high school. So I'm all over the place.
I got to tell you, that's an entirely different balancing act than I had thought we might discuss. Perhaps, how about towards the end of the year, we have another conversation about how you balance the demands of an entire district? Because I think that is a fantastic follow-up conversation we should have when you're getting closer to finishing your first year.
Yeah, I would love that.
Terrific. All right. So, friends, today we're going to focus on how Patrick balances the demands of going to library school and the demands of apparently a very demanding job. So, Patrick, your Twitter bio says that you're an English teacher turned librarian. So tell us a little bit about how your journey and how you made that transition.
Well, when I was in high school, my first job was working as a page at the Trenton Veterans Memorial Library. And that's in Trenton, Michigan, for those who are not from the Detroit area. I did my bachelor's degree in English and sociology and got a secondary teaching certificate. And I taught middle and high school English for about 6 years before I decided to start the Masters of Library Science program. And along the way, I got to work with some really impressive people who were library media specialists. When I was student teaching, I co-taught an entire unit with the media specialist at Allen Park at the time, the late Christine McKinsey.
Can I actually ask you about that? When you did your student teaching, were you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is something that has been bothering me since I became a librarian. I have no memory of ever working with a media specialist or a librarian in my pre-service training or my student teaching. I can guarantee you I never stepped foot in the library where I did my pre-service teaching. Were you asked to do a project with your school librarian in Allen Park, or did you take it upon yourself?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think we had been discussing, it was a while ago, but I think we had been discussing in one of our seminars something about working with the library media specialist, or how a lot of schools didn't have one.
Okay.
And so when I mentioned that I had one that was really, really active in the high school that I was placed at, I was encouraged to kind of explore that a little bit more. And so we decided, my cooperating teacher and I, for ninth grade English, decided to kind of flop some things around. And instead of doing, I think, Romeo and Juliet, we did the research paper instead. So, which is what I co-taught with Christine.
Wow, fantastic.
So she took care of like digital note-taking and source evaluation and that sort of thing, whereas I, as an English teacher, focused on the writing and the synthesis of all of it.
Well, I have to imagine that was a really positive experience, because out of it, you did become a school librarian yourself.
Yeah. And there's other people too. When my first job, I was teaching in Leland, up by Traverse City,
of course,
which is a beautiful area.
Know it well.
And I got laid off because it was just the time, and otherwise I probably wouldn't have left there. Right. But Paula Kelly is the library media specialist there, and she was a wonderful help while I was there. Whether it was helping me teach database navigation or anything like that, or just coming in and doing book talks and that sort of thing. She was always really helpful and really open to working with anyone who wanted to work with her. She ended up actually becoming the IB coordinator when the school took the route of the International Baccalaureate program as well.
Wonderful.
And then Melissa Lambert in Trenton too was a pretty big influence as I was getting started in library school.
Well, I think we've been very lucky, because I also graduated from Wayne State, and to have so many really strong leaders in library coming out of Wayne State, and for me, getting to know them through our professional organization has really been very helpful. Can you tell me about when you decided? It sounds like you've loved being in a library. When did you decide you wanted to work in the library? Going back to when I was working as a library page. Sure.
When I was in middle school, it was kind of a cute little story. I was kind of like a punky alternative sort of kid, and so when I was in middle school, there was a girl who worked at the public library in Trenton who had purple hair, and I just thought she was so cool.
Aww.
And then I ended up making friends with a couple of the people when I was in ninth grade who were working there. And so I ended up getting a job there myself. But then more professionally, I think I just started to get a little bit of what we all know as teacher burnout.
And also
as a
know
class
it well.
Because in teaching English for 6 or 7 years, I just felt like it was time to move on to something else, and I was kind of between doing counseling, so like becoming a school counselor, or going down the library media specialist route. But then I looked at the number of credit hours the counseling program is, and it's like 77 credit hours or something crazy. Whereas the MLIS is just the standard 36.
I was in the same predicament because I had been teaching for 9 years, and I recognized that I needed to get better at what I was doing, and I honestly had no interest in getting better. I was a high school social studies teacher, and I didn't see my excitement for the subject getting really changing. But the person in my building who I felt was just the most amazing person was our school librarian. And I think when you meet fellow librarians who are really fantastic at what they do and really exemplify all the fantastic skills that we embody, I really think that it really does help make your decision that much easier. I know I was never destined for leadership, and listening to teenagers, and in my case, teenagers talk about their problems wasn't something that appealed to me. So school library was an easy decision for me. I like the purple hair option. I do have friends who are quite comfortable coloring their hair, and the school library seems to be a very inviting place for people who want to be different. Yeah. So could you tell us about the program that you're currently enrolled in?
So I'm in the standard online Masters of Library and Information Science program at Wayne State. It's 36 credits. It's 6 foundations courses, 2 technology electives, 2 literature electives, 2 school library classes, and a practicum and the research, the thesis or whatever you want to call it at the end. So I know that Wayne State is offering that experimental certificate right now. I'm not sure how that's going for people, really. I did have Dr. Kamasi as a professor in the summer, who's been one of the people sort of spearheading that, and she's awesome.
Yeah. I've met people who've done the online masters through Wayne State and really have had a positive experience doing it. I will tell you, when back in the day when I started my library program, I think we could take a few classes where we had to meet on campus 10 of the 13 classes, and the other 3 were done online. But the whole idea of accomplishing a degree remotely wasn't available all those many years ago. A friend of mine finished her practicum, or finished her entire master's through Wayne State by way of Singapore. So I know that it definitely can be done to complete this program from anywhere around the world.
Yeah, I've done a couple projects with a girl, Barbara Schmidt, if she's listening. She teaches in Mauritania in West Africa.
Oh, that's outstanding. Well, I do have some downloads in Mauritania, so let's hope that it's her. We'll say hello. But I think the one challenge, if you aren't in the same time zone as the university out of which you are getting your degree, that can be something of a challenge because time-wise, trying to synchronize group activities can be a little difficult if you're working with people from all around the world. But really, what a fantastic experience. I am curious, have you always taken college classes while you were working?
Yes. So even when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I was working full-time in retail at Spencer Gifts, of all places. So I worked full-time all through my bachelor's degree when I was at Grand Valley. Mm-hmm. And I've been working full-time the whole time, teaching the whole time that I've been doing the master's degree. And there's been, last summer was crazy because I took 3 classes, which, I'm happy that I got those 3 classes out of the way. Part of the reason I did that was because 2 of them were the school library classes, and they only offer them every so often. But it was a lot of work and a lot of time.
It was stressful, wasn't it? Stressful to be able to have to do all of that. I remember taking 1 class at a time, but when I tried to double up on classes, there was the added stress that I was taking on that much more intuition. Right. So not only was my time being taken up, but I also spent a great deal more money taking 2 classes at a time. I can only imagine 3 classes at a time really did add to your stress.
Yeah, and then even that was in the summer. So when I went and I had a lot more time to myself, I guess. But even all last school year, I was taking 2 classes both fall and winter semester, which it's a lot to balance, especially when you're teaching something like English, which is so grading intensive, with all the essays and all that kind of stuff. But I did it somehow.
Sure, just sleep deprived. Did any of this become easier when once you became hired as a school librarian? Did any of your classes become in any respect easier because you were now working in a library?
I guess it would have been. It would have been nice to have taken some of the classes that I had taken earlier now rather than the classes that I just finished this past fall, because one of them was a tech elective and one of them was the reference class, which everybody loves.
Dude, I think I know the professor you had, and she taught it when I was in library school. I can't pronounce her name, but yes, she taught the reference class. Yeah, we didn't have an online option for that class, so it's legendary. Can you tell me do you have some strategies which you could share that have helped you along the way when it comes to balancing your the requirements of your job and then also the classes that you're taking for library school?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is establishing a routine and setting aside time and sticking to that to the best of your ability. Obviously, things come up sometimes and you might get behind in doing whatever you're doing. But for me, I've been fortunate enough to have been enrolled in classes where the setup works, where I can do the majority of the work on the weekend because things are due either on a Monday night or a Tuesday night. So that's been helpful, and I would assume that they set them up on purpose for that reason. But just making sure that you know what's going to be required of you, and being forward thinking, I guess, also like keeping in mind what's to come. So like knowing your syllabus really well and knowing when things are due and understanding what the different projects are ahead of time is to the best of your ability. Unfortunately, sometimes professors don't post those materials right away. Right. So think that, that might complicate things too. And sometimes you just lose some sleep and you just have to deal with it.
Yeah. Builds character. Can you tell me, you mentioned reaching out to your PLN. Can you speak to anything specifically which you found supportive when you were incredibly busy?
Yeah, Twitter, of course, is a great place for librarians to be. If you are not on Twitter, I would highly recommend it because most of us are, and most of us use it a lot and share our ideas. And sometimes we just share our goofy thoughts. Also, there's some hilarious, sort of library parody Twitter accounts too out there. Like the Drunk Librarian is really funny. But also, looking at Facebook in particular, I think the two main groups that have helped me out and that I've felt most comfortable posting in have been Future Ready Librarians.
Yes, I've seen you there.
Yeah, yep. And the ALA Think Tank.
Yeah. Well, and I think you mentioned something, and that is laughing at this career that we have chosen. There's a great deal of library humor, and Twitter's a great place to find it. You must also find a way to balance all of this work with some sort of just how do you blow off steam? And I know that you have talents beyond being in the library and working retail.
Well, I still read a lot. And that's always, calming and soothing and helpful to me. Part of the reason I became a librarian, and probably why most of us became librarians, is because we like to read. I also have an interesting commute in that just geographically, if you're not familiar with Michigan, I have about a 45-minute commute from Trenton to East Point where I work. And so what I've spent a lot of time doing is listening to audiobooks too. And I try and keep it light. Right now I'm listening to Steve-O from Jackass's autobiography, and it's hilarious. And there's parts of it obviously that are sad because I don't know if you know anything about his life, but he had kind of a downward spiral. But he's also a very well-known, hilarious person in general. And I always liked listening to Tina Fey's Bossy Pants.
Of course. Because she narrates it herself.
Yes, and that's the other thing about audiobooks and memoirs that I love now is that all the authors are narrating them themselves. I actually re-listen. The Kite Runner is my favorite book of all time, and I listened to the audiobook for the first time this past fall because Khaled Hosseini had read it aloud, and I didn't know that. And I'd been wanting to reread it in general, just because I hadn't in a while. But yeah. So I read it and I listen to music a lot, or I listen to audiobooks a lot. I mentioned music because that's where I was going next.
Sure.
Because I play a lot of music too.
As a musician, not just on the radio.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I play ukulele and guitar. I'm better at the ukulele than I am at the guitar. And then I also play saxophone. And I can play any of the woodwind instruments in band, but saxophone is my primary instrument. And every summer I go to the Trenton High band camp and work as a saxophone instructor with them, which is a lot of fun too.
Well, and I imagine it does tap a different skill set and has a a different set of talents that you have that you can still share and help you connect with your students. I imagine that at some point your musical skills as to be able to play instruments will at some way or shape or another find them into the library that you work in.
Yeah. The kids love it when Mr. Taylor brings in the ukulele.
I know several librarians who have made it their personal goal to learn how to play an instrument, so when they sing at circle time, that they have they're able to accompany themselves. And I do want to say my own personal favorite audiobook for adults and not necessarily for kids was Kitchen Confidential. And
I loved it too.
It was audiobook. It was read by Anthony Bourdain, and the creepiest thing was that he had already died. So listening to it really, and it's not just because I love being in the kitchen, but it really is a fantastic step-by-step. If you are ever entertaining the idea of opening a restaurant, you will think long and hard about that decision after listening to Anthony Bourdain. But I really find it was such an intimate experience because it was like he was talking to me. And I know I hung on every word. And I think it's important, if I can just sort of bring this back, that librarians in general revere the audio format in a way that our students and our patrons feel they can, enjoy audiobooks as books in just a different format. I think that there are people who don't feel it's reading. I think I have a more intense experience when I listen to books because I'm hanging on every word. And I think as a librarian, that's a very important perspective you bring to the job.
Well, and I think that a lot of us think back to our own sort of like middle school language arts class experience when a teacher might just, hit play on the audiobook and it would be this really dry read aloud of whatever it was. I wish I could remember the one that that I experienced that I had in middle school. But sometimes it's about finding the right narrator too.
Sure.
That can be a big part of it. And and that's why it's so great when we hear people who are writing memoirs and autobiographies and they're reading them themselves.
Absolutely. Well, and I know when I introduce audiobooks to my students, because we do have access to them using Overdrive, Sora, and Hoopla, a lot of times my students, when they first put their headphones in and they're listening, they say to me, "Where are the pictures? I can't see the pictures." And I said, "No, sweetie, it's an audiobook. It's just your ears. There's nothing to see." And these are little guys, but it is interesting because they really do get lost in the experience. It's really fun to watch. Can I go back to asking you more about your job? I felt when I was in library school, I was at a distinct disadvantage because I didn't have a library to work with. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was raising 3 very young children. I imagine that for you, being able to draw on your current experiences working in the libraries that you do, it really does add to your experience as a library student.
Yeah, definitely. There aren't, as far as I know, I don't think there's any other people who are enrolled in the program, at least in Michigan, that are currently working as school librarians also. So I'm in a unique position there, and I could be wrong. But it's certainly been. It's certainly been helpful, kind of as I'm finishing up the degree and getting started with this new job. I feel really prepared, but it's also nice that especially going into this last the research-based class, I'll have a library that, like, whatever I choose to do my final essay on, I can, work in my own libraries and use that information.
Sure. When I was expected to do assignments in my library program, I didn't have an actual school I could automatically go to because I was working. I couldn't go to a school librarian and say, "Hi, I'm in library school. Could I work together with you on this project?" I was just this random stranger who'd show up and say, "Hi, my name is Amy. I'm in library school. Could I work with you on this activity or this project?" And so I did feel very much an outsider, trying to get in on the inside of what was going on in the schools. So I imagine you have, when you learn, you can apply what you're learning directly to your current employment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It would have been because I just started in East Point this year. I actually, randomly enough, going back to job stuff, I actually started off the previous school year as the librarian in Riverview schools, but in about November of that school year, a sixth grade English teacher had left and taken a job in a different district, so they cut my position and bumped me over to sixth grade English with an involuntary transfer. So like thinking back to that time, it was very helpful, especially, as much as people hate the cataloging class, that I was taking that while I was working in as the librarian for Riverview, and that was very helpful as I was kind of like learning how to navigate Destiny and enter records and things like that. And it would have been really challenging to not have any sort of library background already, too, I think, and having the experience of working with school librarians in the past as an English teacher. So I think I can draw on that experience as well and apply it to what I'm doing. It's just kind of the flip side.
That's great. I really would like to hear how you're going to answer this one. You have your practicum starting, and that is you're working with school librarians and in you're going to be in another library. And I'm wondering, given your full-time status working at East Point, how are you fulfilling the requirements of your practicum and not losing your job?
So I've been talking about this with my assistant superintendent and curriculum director since I got hired, and so they're being very supportive. Another one of the many weird things about my job is that I'm 60% funded by curriculum, like by the just general budget, and then 40% of my funding comes from Title IV funding. So for those who don't know, there's a lot to it, but basically Title IV funding is used to quote unquote improve well-rounded educational programming. So that can be things like rebuilding the library program, or collaborating with teachers, or I'm working on putting maker spaces in the elementary schools, and that sort of thing. So my time in the afternoon when I travel to the other schools is the time that's funded by Title IV. So what we're doing is I'm staggering my schedule so that I'll take one afternoon each week throughout the course of the semester, and I will travel to my practicum school, which is just happens to be the district that you work in.
Yes, it is. Yes, we might cross paths.
Yes. So like this coming Monday, the 6th, I'll be going to North High School in the afternoon. Then the following week, I would go on Tuesday afternoon,
right,
and so on and so forth. And then I think I figured it out that I have to take two sick days or 2 personal days on top of it, which is fine. It could be way more than that. I could have a much less supportive administration.
It sounds like your administration sees you as an investment, that they're willing to make these accommodations because they see you being a certified library media specialist with a master's degree to be an asset to your district.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah. No, I looked at your calendar and I was really impressed because it seems like your district is willing to give you some latitude and some flexibility. And I think that in that respect, when you cover as many buildings as you do, it may be that you, to a certain extent, can work that flexibility to your advantage.
Right. And then there's going to like the library media leaders meetings with RISA. My school actually isn't in Wayne County, but it's technically in Macomb County, even though it's just north of you. I can apply those hours too, because I know Amanda's going to be at one. And then I would imagine that someone in your district will be at the other one.
Indeed.
As long as someone from the district is there, I can count it.
All right. Fantastic. I have actually heard of individuals who have been able to do their practicum in their own building, which I think is cheating. But how did you go about finding the district where you would do your practicum? How did you have a hand in that, or did you sort of throw yourself at the mercy of your professors?
Well, a little of both. I knew that my schedule was going to be a weird one to accommodate, so I made contact with the practicum coordinator ahead of time, which I highly recommend that you do, even if you don't think your schedule is going to be weird to accommodate, because then you might have some more flexibility in choosing where you're placed and that sort of thing. But I had emailed her and explained my situation, and she emailed me back with some hope that we can make it work, and I'm glad that we were able to. She asked me if there was anybody in particular that I wanted to work with, and I said I didn't really mind. I wanted something where I could have also at least some kind of secondary placement in addition to elementary, if not solely secondary. Just because I spend most of my time now in elementary, so I want the other side of that sort of thing. And I threw some names around to people that I knew, like the librarian and like Melissa and Lisa and Trenton, and the librarian in Carlson. His name's Michael. And I think I mentioned Kathy Lester's name too, just because I think she's so wonderful.
Well, and it sounds like networking. I mean, you're not only networking because of your job, you're networking because of your degree. And this whole communication piece, the importance of communicating with your practicum advisor, communicating with your administrator, communicating with your superintendent's office, all of this the expectation is on you, but it seems to only make your job easier the more you are proactive in communicating with all of them.
Yeah, and I think part of that goes back to being able to advocate for yourself and your job. I know you had an episode about advocacy with Kathy already earlier this season. Yeah. But and I wrote a piece that got published in Bridge Magazine last summer. About school librarians and why we need them, and how it's just ridiculous that we're at this point where only 8% of Michigan schools, or whatever the number is, actually have a full-time librarian.
Could I ask you to give us to send me that link, and we'll make sure to include that for our readers, because I remember reading it, and it would be really fantastic if you would send that to me, and so other people can read that. I think the ridiculous thing I heard was Michigan prisons are by law required to house libraries for their inmates, but Michigan schools are not required to have libraries for their students. So it is bleak at best. Can you specify a little bit about your practicum, which is coming up? What are you going to be required? What requirements are you going to be required to satisfy while you are doing fulfilling these hours working at the other schools?
So it's on top of the 90 field hours. Where I'm working under the supervision of a certified library media specialist. There's a reflective journal. There's these online seminars that we have to do through I don't know, whatever the system is called. They're not on Blackboard anymore. They're on Canvas now, and so. I can't remember what the collaboration thing is, but it's like the same thing as what Blackboard Collaborate was. And then there is a project proposal, and that's just specifying basically what we're working on while we're doing our field experience work, and submitting that as a proposal, and then turning it later into like a presentation and research piece.
Sure. What are you thinking about that will perhaps drive your practicum experience? Are you looking for things in particular when you go to your practicum because you have an actual libraries you can apply what you learn in them?
Well, yeah, and this kind of goes back to communicating with the practicum coordinator, because I had also mentioned to her that it would be nice to be placed in a district like Livonia or Plymouth Canton or Grosse Pointe, where there's librarians in each building. Maybe not necessarily. Some people I know, Grosse Pointe. Some of the librarians are split between buildings. I think Plymouth Canton and Livonia still both have a full-time person in each building. But because I want to see how things operate at each level.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what my job is.
Right. K-12. You run the gamut.
Yeah. And so in addition to the teaching side of things, just seeing how, whether it's upper elementary or a middle school library program or high school, how it operates. I got to see a little bit of what goes on at North High School in the library, and it's awesome. It's impressive. I really I applaud your district for having such a great program, because it's so different than what a lot of people are used to seeing in libraries. Because it was packed in there when I was there, and I get the impression that that's usually the case.
Well, and I think that it does take, it takes years to develop, and it takes a strong advocate in the library to make sure to build not only this culture of reading, but to create a space where students gravitate and can find different reasons to be in the library. And I know Amanda is amazing, and I know a lot of kids who go to the library because it's such a great place to be. It's very personality driven. I've found that our libraries are very much a product of the person who runs it. Both a daunting thought and a very empowering thought. Can you tell me, I'm very excited for you, when are you going to be done with your master's?
So I will be done. So I don't know when the actual graduation date is.
I don't want to jinx your luck.
but this is my last semester.
Oh, right? Congratulations!
That starts on Monday. Oh. So I'll be done. The end is near.
The end is near.
The classes are over in April. Yes. So I don't know. Commencements might be at the end of April or the beginning of May. I don't really care, because I'm probably not going to go walk, because whatever.
I myself did not walk. I understand it was a very long ceremony, and I would not put my small children through that. They were small at the time, but they did have fun trying my cap, my hood on, and my gown on, and we all took pictures in Mommy's graduation outfit, and so that was what we did. And we had a party, and that was fun. But you definitely need to celebrate. Can you give us any sort of last bits of advice when it comes to navigating library school and the demands of a full-time job?
Again, it's all about finding a balance, and accepting that sometimes you're just going to be tired. Like there's just no way around it.
Sure. No. Well, can you tell us, how can we find you on social media? Because I know you mentioned that you are on social media. Can you give us an idea of where we can find you? I'll also embed this in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So on Twitter, my handle is Take Up the Mantle, which is an obscure line from a Harry Potter book. Because I'm a librarian.
There you go.
Instagram is GV Taylor P. GV like Grand Valley, Taylor, which is my last name, and the letter P, then .reads. So, and I also make music videos on YouTube. And so I use the handle Close to Home, which is another like obscure reference to a line and from a song. But the actual like username it looks like Closet Zero Home.
Well, perhaps you could give us a link and I'll put it in the show notes. Okay. Listen, Patrick, you've been very indulgent in letting me pry into your all of your personal business. And I do appreciate you sharing this, because it's oftentimes I talk to people who are trying to juggle a great deal in addition to working full time. And the demands of library school are many. And I appreciate you sharing. I do want to get back to you later about how you managed to be a solo librarian for an entire district, because the questions I've already got going, and I would like to sort of revisit this around the time you graduate. Patrick, we will get together, and I wish you well, and I'm sure our paths will cross as you are doing your practicum.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am so appreciative to Patrick for sharing his story with us, because there are so many people who listen to this podcast who are doing exactly what he is doing, and that is trying to balance all the demands of our school and the demands of going to school. I'd like to make sure you check out the resources in our show notes today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. As promised, this is a weekly podcast, and I'm very excited about the episodes lined up for January. I will hold off on announcing next week's title as I'm confirming interview dates, but tune in each week, and I know you'll learn something new about this wonderful profession of ours. I know I always do.